Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, but not into the usual battlefield chaos or political plots. No, tonight you slip into something stranger. You're in front of a mirror warm light buzzing above you and the smell of old soap lingering in the air. The year 1923. The place a small Munich apartment. You're standing behind a man, lean, fidgety, not yet a tyrant, not even close. He's trying to decide between looking forgettable and becoming an icon. His name, of course, is Adolf Hitler, but right now no one's really paying attention to him. He's a failed artist with intense eyes and an awkward intensity, and tonight he's toying with his face in a way that might just shape the 20th century. In his hand is a cheap steel razor, and he's studying his upper lip like it owes him money. You watch as he tries a full mustache nope, a handlebar too eccentric, the Kaiser's sweeping style far too old school. Then he pauses, trims carefully, almost nervously, and leaves just a small rectangle of hair in the center. It looks a little ridiculous, like someone halfway through shaving and then got distracted by a knock at the door. You blink. He leans in closer, studies the result. He frowns, but not entirely displeased. That little rectangle is a quiet rebellion against traditional German masculinity. It's also, unfortunately, the birth of the most infamous mustache in modern history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I'm always curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out of the mirror's reflection and into the quiet streets of Munich. There's unrest in the air. Germany is reeling from war, inflation is absurd, a loaf of bread might cost a wheelbarrow of marks, and angry voices fill beer halls where ideas bubble and boil over. Amid all this, the young man with the awkward little square on his lip begins shouting louder than the rest. Still no one talks about the mustache yet. It hasn't become a symbol. It hasn't become a meme. It's just strange, but so is he. Historians still argue whether the style choice was inspired by anything in particular. Some say it was mimicry, perhaps of film comedians or the silent era stars like Charlie Chaplin. But that's a hard pill to swallow, knowing how much Hitler detested being compared to clowns. Chaplin's version had charm. Hitler's not so much. More angular, clipped, almost surgical. A haircut for the lip. Now picture him pacing a rented room practicing speeches in front of the mirror. He gestures, rants, sweats under the gaslight, but his eyes keep flicking back to that mustache, as if it needs constant reassurance. Or perhaps it reassures him. You notice something else: he's obsessed with symmetry. The tiny detail of that strip, perfectly centered, helps anchor the chaos of his expressions. Like a punctuation mark, a cruel period at the end of a rage-filled sentence. One of his roommates years later said he used to spend too long grooming that thing, like it mattered more than the words coming out of his mouth. The odd thing is, maybe it did. 1,000 wild voices echoed through Germany in those years, but none had a face quite like his. Here's your first mainstream historical fact of the night. By the mid-1920s, Hitler was already the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Yes, the Nazis, but he still wasn't taken seriously by many. And that lip fuzz. It didn't help. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. At least one early Nazi pamphlet allegedly had to retouch his photo because people laughed at the mustache and didn't feel threatened. Imagine that photoshopping fascism before Photoshop even existed. You walk with him into a beer hall now, the air sour with spilled lager and boiled sausage. He steps on stage. The lighting's bad, but something strange happens. The mustache catches just enough shadow to frame his mouth without hiding it. It emphasizes every word, every snarl, and suddenly it's not funny anymore. You think of modern branding. Logos, fonts, signature looks. Hitler, whether he knew it or not, was branding himself in the mirror that night. That tiny strip of hair would soon be plastered on armbands, stamped cigarette cards, even children's toys, like a trademark of terror. But not everyone saw it that way yet. Some local newspapers mocked him. One called him the toothbrush prophet. Another simply said, Herr Hitler appears to have lost a bet with his razor. Still, it stuck. And here's the uncomfortable reality check. You probably wouldn't survive history if all you remembered was the mustache. But the world did. It couldn't help it. That tiny square became a shortcut to evil in every political cartoon, every school book, every villain sketched by a lazy screenwriter. You exit the hall now. It's cold. Munich's cobbled streets glisten with recent rain. The figure with the strange mustache disappears into a doorway face down, probably planning something awful. But all you can think about is why. Why that shape? Why that stubbornness? Why not a full beard, a bare lip, or literally anything else? Historians still argue whether it was trauma taste or pure theatrical instinct. But you're just following the shape through time, one hair at a time. You trail him back further now through the fog of time and the sour scent of boiled cabbage clinging to Vienna's narrow alleyways. Before the shouting, before the parades and the flags, there's just a pale teenage Adolf with sunken cheeks and empty pockets, and no mustache. You watch him sketch on street corners, sleeves too short, fingers raw from cold. He's trying to sell postcards of cityscapes, shaky lines, dull watercolors, hoping for a few coins from tourists with pity to spare. No facial hair yet, not even a whisper of the lip fuzz that will one day haunt the 20th century. He's clean-shaven, and it makes sense. It's practical. He wants to appear presentable to the art academies he so desperately dreams of. You hover in that moment just outside the gates of the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, where his second application is about to be rejected. Again, brutally. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Hitler was rejected twice by the Academy. Not for lack of talent entirely, but because his work lacked human figures. He could render architecture okay, but people, he didn't understand them, maybe never would. You follow him that evening, crushed, humiliated, back to a cheap hostel. He's 18, boiling with a mix of rage and helplessness, and you can sense it. This is the beginning of the spiral. The moment where the world becomes his enemy. An image becomes everything. At the soup line, he stands behind a man with a large, bushy Prussian beard, the kind that commands a room. Hitler stares, and you see it, envy, disdain. Who knows? But the beard doesn't suit him. It never will. Fast forward a few months. He's sleeping in shelters, reading obsessively politics, history, mythology, and odd theories that swirl in the dark corners of empire. You picture him scribbling manifestos and notebooks next to men muttering about Freemasons' gold standards and Jewish conspiracies. This is where he learns the power of voice, of presence, but still no mustache. Historians still argue whether young Hitler's clean-shaven look was due to poverty discipline or sheer indecision. Some even suggest he tried different looks in secret, only to shave them off in embarrassment before anyone saw. Like a teenager hiding a hickey with a scarf, only it's fascism he's flirting with. Here's your quirky fringe detail. Rumor has it he once tried a goatee during his Vienna years, but a priest yelled at him for resembling the devil. The story may be apocryphal, but it lingers like stale pipe smoke in an old armchair. You find yourself now at a cafe table watching him sit alone, sipping weak coffee with trembling hands. He reads Schopenhauer, nodding at every sentence like he's in a sermon. The waiter glances at him, something off about the boy's intensity. Like he's rehearsing for something big, but no one's given him the part yet. Still no facial hair, not a single strand. It's worth noting that Vienna's artistic and academic circles at the time leaned toward the clean-shaven look. Beards were for older intellectuals, bohemian eccentrics, or military men. Young strivers like Hitler kept things neat. Combed hair, pressed trousers. Desperate ambition disguised as control. But the deeper truth, you start to sense that his face, his entire presentation was becoming a tool. Something malleable, sharpened. He watches people react to him, studies their eyes. If the words don't land, maybe the stare will. If the stare doesn't work, maybe someday, something else. Now you're back in the hostel and he's shaving in a cracked mirror with cold water from a dented tin cup. His hand trembles, but his expression is fixed. There's fury in the precision. Each swipe is a declaration, I will matter. That's the secret, isn't it? It was never about grooming. It was about control. His lack of power over the world outside was redirected inward into every hair, every angle, every detail of the man in the mirror. And then a brief moment his lip trembles. He stares into his own reflection and mouths something under his breath. You can't hear it, but it's not in German. It sounds like Latin. Maybe something from a book. Or maybe it's gibberish he's convinced is holy. You step back. He's just a boy still, but the emptiness in his eyes, that's ancient. Outside, Vienna keeps moving. Artists paint. Politicians bicker. Cafe-goers argue over Freud and Wagner. And no one notices the angry youth with the empty portfolio and the untouched upper lip. That will change. You fast forward again, he's older now, maybe 21. His cheeks are fuller. He's moving to Munich, leaving behind the ashes of Vienna, the poverty, the humiliation. He calls it a fresh start. Still no mustache. He works odd jobs, avoids taxes, keeps to himself. But the rage follows. It's fermenting now, aging like a cursed wine. Every rejection, every cold night on a hostel cot adds another layer to the sediment. One night you find him sketching self-portraits. They're bad too, angular too harsh, but you notice something. He's added a little shadow under his nose. Just a pencil stroke. As if he's imagining it there. As if the idea is beginning to take root. No one's sure when the real hair appeared. There are no photos from this exact moment. Just whispers. Historians still argue whether the shift from clean-shaven to the early stages of the mustache happened before the war or during it. That's coming next, of course. But right now, you stand on the edge of the moment before the face changes. Before the symbol begins. And you feel it, don't you? That eerie quiet before something iconic and horrible takes shape. You wake up with the sounds of hoofbeats echoing off cobblestones. The air smells like chimney smoke and damp wool. You're in Vienna again, but it's a few years later and the streets are darker, the whispers louder. The city's heart is still beating with culture and music and pastry shops, but you're not walking among composers and poets tonight. You're shadowing someone else. He's a little older now, less gaunt. He still walks fast like he's trying to escape something. His pockets are still mostly empty, though his eyes are full of calculation. You notice something instantly. He's not as clean-shaven as before. The razor has started skipping days. He still doesn't have the toothbrush mustache yet. But he's experimenting. You catch glimpses of small, thin mustaches, sometimes a full upper lip strip, sometimes patchy. Never quite confident. Like a man playing dress-up in a mirror, unsure of which version of himself the world will fear the most. He works now and then painting postcards, helping with building projects, drifting through Vienna's underside. He lives in men's homes and reads obsessively at the public library. Thick tomes on Germanic mythology, nationalist theory, racial pseudoscience. You walk past the table where he sits for hours, lips moving silently as he reads occasionally, underlining passages in borrowed books he's supposed to return clean. And there it is, a trace of soot-black hair above his lip. Still faint. Still unsure of itself. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Between 1908 and 1913, Hitler spent most of his time in Vienna living in hostels and flop houses, effectively homeless. During this period, his anti-Semitic ideas intensified. While not yet fully political, he absorbed every far-right newspaper pamphlet and crank theory he could get his hands on. And here's your fringe tidbit according to one fellow resident at the Mennerheim, a men's shelter. Hitler once gave an impromptu lecture about why beards were a decadent form of facial rebellion. He reportedly said true order starts at the face. Of course, this is anecdotal, and historians still argue whether he said it at all, but it does echo his obsession with controlled appearances. He didn't just want to be seen, he wanted to be defined sharply, precisely. Not like the blurry caricatures of men he loathed. He wanted a clean outline. Even his hair greased, parted, arranged like it had been filed under a system. You notice he starts observing people differently, too. Not their souls, their surfaces, what they wear, how they walk, how they're perceived. You trail him through art galleries where he scoffs at impressionists, muttering that their brushstrokes are lazy. He prefers statues, hard, symmetrical, eternal. In his sketches, his architecture is rigid. Harsh lines, perfect balance. Not a single flourish wasted. If a building were a face, it would wear a square-centered mustache. You pass a street preacher one day loudly declaring that Austria is losing its strength, its soul, its identity. The crowd murmurs. Hitler listens. Not just to the words, but to the reaction. The crowd responds to sharp tones, to certainty, to rage. And you can almost see the switch flip in him. Words are power. But words with the right face behind them, that's something else. Now imagine him again in his tiny rented room. The mirror is cracked but functional. His clothes are hanging off the back of a chair. A candle flickers. He leans forward, dabs at his lip with a damp cloth, and picks up his razor. You expect him to shave it all clean. But this time he pauses. He leaves a line. Thin, awkward, barely there. Not quite the full Hitler mustache yet, but you recognize the intention. He stares at himself as if daring his reflection to argue. This is where the transformation begins. Historians still debate whether this phase was purely aesthetic or whether he was emulating someone. One theory says he admired certain performers of vaudeville comics who wore smaller mustaches because they were easier to exaggerate in silent film. Another theory claims he saw it on soldiers. Still another suggests he simply had a facial scar near the lip that made fuller mustaches uncomfortable. You reach for any solid truth, but they slip through your fingers. All you're left with is the sensation that the mustache was a decision, not an accident, a boundary marker between past and future. He begins writing around this time. Long, angry essays, political tracts that blend mysticism with nationalism and a distorted vision of German pride. The facial hair, minimal as it is, becomes part of that story, like punctuation on a manifesto no one's asked for. You hear him speaking aloud, practicing in the dark, whispering invective against imaginary enemies. His fingers grip the edge of the table. The candle flickers again. His shadow stretches across the wall, and yes, that small, silly-looking line of hair casts a much larger silhouette. That's the terrifying part, isn't it? Something so small can ripple into something so massive. A strip of hair, an inch of style, but placed on the right or wrong face at the right time, and suddenly it's burned into the psyche of the world. He doesn't have power yet, but you can feel it forming, the ideas, the posture, the need to be seen. And even now, you're starting to realize the mustache isn't a statement of rebellion. It's a signal of control, of ownership, over himself, over his image, and eventually over others. You drift outside just as snow begins to fall. Vienna's steeples fade into the mist. Somewhere in a room above you, a young man with ambition far bigger than his wallet is trimming a tiny strip of hair and whispering to himself like a preacher waiting for an audience. The echo of that whisper will carry someday. But for now, it's just between him and the mirror. You're jolted forward into the pounding rhythm of marching boots. Mud sucks at your shoes as you stand on the edge of a makeshift trench. It's 1914 now, and war has torn the world open like a wound that won't close. Welcome to the Western Front. The air is sharp with gunpowder wet wool and the lingering taste of tin can rations. And there just over the ridgeline you spot him. Adolf. He's thinner again, but harder now. Weathered. He walks with a hunch not from fear, but from the constant, relentless weight of the world pressing down. His uniform hangs loose, the buttons mismatched. And on his face, there it is. The mustache, smaller than you remember, thinner than it will become, but unmistakably centered, squared, and utterly intentional. Not the stylish twirl of a dandy, not the full sweep of a military officer. No, this is precise, trimmed like a postage stamp, and already unsettling. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hitler served as a messenger during World War I with the Bavarian Reserve Infantry. He was wounded twice and temporarily blinded in a gas attack. His experience on the front lines became a cornerstone of his identity and his propaganda. And here's your quirky tidbit. One anecdote claims that the toothbrush mustache, yes, that one was adopted during WWI because gas masks fit poorly over fuller facial hair. It said some soldiers trimmed their beards to a narrow strip to create a better seal. Historians still argue whether Hitler did it for practical reasons or for style, or because he misunderstood a superior's sarcastic suggestion to lose the soup strainer. You trail him as he runs messages through shell-pocked fields. He dodges fire sprints over broken fences and flinches when the whine of incoming shells gets too close. But not once does he cover his upper lip. The mustache is oddly defiant. Even when caked with mud or soaked in sweat, it stays put as if to say, "You will remember this face." And you do. There's something about the war that shapes him, not just politically, but aesthetically. You hear him mumble after dark tucked in his corner of the barracks, a blanket wrapped tight as he watches the flickering lamp shadows. He talks about discipline, about order, about clean lines. It always comes back to lines with him on paper, on uniforms, on faces. At one point, a fellow soldier teases him. "Nice broom under your nose." The man chuckles half drunk on weak beer. Hitler doesn't reply. He just stares flat and silent. The man laughs again, then walks away. That soldier dies 3 days later in a mortar blast. Coincidence? Of course, probably, but you remember that stare, and maybe he does too. You catch him sketching again. Bunkers, flags, long halls with impossibly high ceilings. His notebook is smudged and damp, but the pencil lines are crisp. His dreams are no longer paintings, they're blueprints. For something bigger, much bigger. And the mustache, it's fully formed now. No longer a test, it's a fixture, a logo, a brand. One of his commanding officers remarks in a letter that Private Hitler is peculiar but dependable. Quiet, serious. Wears a curious style of facial hair that I find distracting. The line is never followed up. But you wonder if even then the mustache made people uncomfortable without knowing why. You hear him give a speech to a group of fellow soldiers in a dugout. It's informal, more of a rant really, but he paces like a politician. Talks about Germany's soul, its betrayal, its need for cleansing rebirth destiny. Some nod, others shift uncomfortably. But one thing's clear, the mustache helps. It draws the eye, focuses the face, makes every word seem more deliberate even if it isn't. Even if it's madness dressed in military gray. And here's something eerie when a photographer visits the trenches. Hitler positions himself front and center. Not a leader yet, not even a standout. But there he is, poised, eyes fierce, mustache neat. In one photo, the soldiers around him smile. He doesn't. He looks through the camera, not into it. Like he's already seeing something else. Something past the war, past the mud and the rats and the noise. Something larger, Historians still debate whether his wartime persona was born here in the blood and trenches, or whether this was simply the cocoon phase. Either way, when the war ends and you see him stare at the news of Germany's surrender, he doesn't look defeated. He looks focused, because now there's a wound wide enough for him to crawl through. The mustache survives the war, just like him. You travel with him back to Munich. The country is broken. The streets are filled with hunger, revolution, uncertainty. Everyone's looking for someone to blame, someone to follow, someone with answers, or at least a strong face. In public meetings, his words sharpen. His movements become theatrical. He learns to gesture with his whole body. His voice, a raw, jagged thing, rises and falls with perfect drama. And always the mustache stays still. It anchors him. It's not vanity anymore, it's armor. One day a child points at him and giggles. Why does that man have a tiny curtain on his lip? The mother hushes the child and pulls him away, but Hitler hears. You see his jaw tighten. Later that night, he's in front of a mirror again, trimming it, even, geometric, not one hair out of line. He stares into the glass and whispers again. This time it's German. This time it's chilling. You know now what he's doing. He's sculpting the villain. Not with clay or stone or brushstrokes, but with silence posture and a very, very specific square of hair. The city smells of sausage smoke and cold beer, but the mood is anything but festive. You're in Munich now sometime around 1920. Germany is spiraling, politically fractured, economically wrecked, and psychologically raw. A once proud empire has collapsed into confusion and inflation, and the streets are buzzing with slogans, flags, and fists. Everyone is shouting, but one voice is starting to rise above the noise. And it belongs to the man with the mustache. You follow him as he climbs onto a makeshift platform in a beer hall packed with angry men. The air is hot and thick with sweat and cigarette smoke. Your eyes scan the room. Leather boots tapping, eyes narrow, fists clenched on steins. And at the center of it all, his voice slices through the tension like a blade. You don't even need to see his face to know who it is. That nasal cadence, the staccato rhythm, the sudden bursts of rage and icy pauses, it's unmistakable. But when you do finally catch a glimpse, your stomach tightens. There it is again, the mustache. Now perfectly squared, no fluff, no curve, no romance. Just a black postage stamp under his nose like a censor bar for the truth. It's not accidental anymore. This is the brand. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 1920, Hitler officially joined what would become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. He soon became its chief propagandist and public speaker, leveraging his war veteran status and incendiary rhetoric to captivate a growing base of frustrated nationalists. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some scholars claim Hitler deliberately maintained the mustache as a way to visually separate himself from other prominent German political figures of the time, many of whom had full beards or wide traditional mustaches. He wanted to look modern, clean, different. Historians still argue whether he was influenced by American silent film stars like Charlie Chaplin, whom he reportedly admired early on, or whether the style simply became his through stubborn persistence. You drift along the edges of that beer hall crowd, brushing against wool coats and overhearing fragments of conversation. Have you seen him before? He's got a fire in him. Strange little man, but I can't stop listening. And always that mustache. At first, people laugh at it. Quietly. But as the months pass, it becomes harder to laugh. The man wearing it is no longer just ranting. He's organizing, structuring, laying out plans. You watch as he transforms beer hall speeches into rehearsed performances, complete with dramatic pauses, choreographed gestures, and well-timed scowls. His mustache becomes part of the act. When he shouts, it quivers. When he sneers, it sharpens. When he smiles, rare, cold, deliberate, it somehow makes the whole expression more disturbing. It's no longer just a strip of hair, it's punctuation. You find yourself staring at posters being plastered across alley walls. crude illustrations of a man with his arm raised, and that same square of black fur under his nose. Sometimes it's exaggerated, sometimes stylized, but always unmistakable. People may not know his name yet, but they recognize that. And this is where the transformation speeds up. You're at a small Nazi rally now, maybe 100 people. The sun is setting, casting an orange glow over the red swastika banners. You hear Hitler speak about betrayal, decay, rebirth. The words are ugly, charged, but delivered with rhythm and force. At one point, he locks eyes with a young man in the crowd and points. Do you believe in Germany? The man nods, startled. Do you look like Germany? And again, the crowd turns to the mustache. Because somehow absurdly, that's what Germany is supposed to look like now. Historians still debate whether Hitler understood branding in the modern sense, or whether his image control was instinctual. But what's certain is that by the early 1920s, he never appeared in public without his uniform, his hairstyle, or his mustache. Ever. One aide once joked. He guards that square of hair like it's a border checkpoint. The aide disappeared from public view not long after. Coincidence? Who knows? But you've learned not to shrug things off in this story. You follow Hitler back into his office one evening. The room is lined with notes, plans, and propaganda sketches. He picks up a small mirror and stares at himself. Then methodically he trims both ends of the mustache with surgical precision. Not a hair over the line, not a curve, not a smile. Then he holds up a small black and white photo, a headshot. He scribbles a note on the back, use this one for the next press print. You peek over his shoulder. The photo is stark, dark suit, steel gaze, and that mustache front and center like a flag. Even now it looks ridiculous, cartoonish. But somehow when he wears it, it dares you to laugh, dares you to flinch. You walk out into the street where a shopkeeper is hanging a newspaper in the window. A headline reads, Firebrand Nationalist Gains Momentum. The photo beneath it, you already know. And just before you turn away, you catch sight of two children, mimicking it, holding bits of black cloth under their noses and shouting nonsense. One parent laughs nervously. The other quickly pulls them away. That's the thing with symbols. They can start as jokes, as quirks, as throwaway affectations. But if they're repeated enough, feared enough, followed enough, they become real. And this mustache, it's no longer just hair. It's a warning. A warning with sharp edges and dark intentions. And you haven't even reached 1923 yet. You're in the back of a dusty beer hall again. Only this time it feels like the air is crackling with something different. Not just fury, not just fire, but anticipation. It's November 1923, and the place is brimming with uniforms and armbands, rifles leaning against the walls and the low hum of nervous loyalty. You feel it in your bones, something big is about to snap. Adolf's pacing near the entrance, his posture stiff, jaw locked. Eyes scanning every corner, his voice is low sharp. He barks instructions to party leaders with the tone of a man already imagining his own statue. The mustache. Still there, still flawless. It might be the only thing about him tonight that looks calm. Here's your mainstream historical fact. On November 8th, 9th, 1923, Hitler and the Nazi Party launched the infamous Beer Hall Putsch in Munich, attempting to overthrow the Weimar Republic. It failed. Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison, but the event catapulted him to national attention. And now your quirky tidbit. According to one fringe anecdote during the chaos of the failed coup, Hitler reportedly tripped and fell while fleeing the scene, and instinctively covered his mustache with his hand, not his head. Protect the brand, some would later joke. Historians still argue whether this moment actually happened or was added later by propagandists as symbolic dedication. Either way, the image lingers. You watch the chaos unfold. Uniformed men storm into the beer hall, shouting that the revolution has begun. They fire into the ceiling. People scream. Politicians are rounded up at gunpoint and invited to support the new regime. But even as it unravels, Hitler doesn't waver. His voice is steady. His hand raised, the mustache perched like an exclamation mark on his face. You notice people looking not just at him, but through him, as if he's become something more than a man, more than a voice, more than a uniform. He's a symbol now, and symbols don't bleed, except when they do, because the putsch collapses. Soldiers fire, bodies fall. Chaos turns to confusion, then panic. Hitler runs well, hobbles off with a dislocated shoulder. He hides in a friend's attic, moaning through gritted teeth. But even there, even in hiding, he has someone bring him a razor, because he will not let that mustache grow wild. He will not be seen unkempt. He will not become just another failed revolutionary. He knows this is only a pause, a setback, not the end of the story. You follow him into prison, Landsberg Fortress. It's more cushy than you'd expect. Books, letters, visitors, and he's treated more like a quirky author than a dangerous radical. The guards call him Herr Hitler. Some even ask for autographs. Here he writes Mein Kampf, the rambling manifesto that lays out his ideology, his plans, his deep, dark obsessions. You see him hunched over a desk pencil, dancing in jagged loops. He rewrites the narrative of the failed coup, paints himself as a prophet, a martyr, a misunderstood visionary. And through it all, the mustache remains like a signature that refuses to be erased. Here's the twist. There's no official prison mugshot of Hitler. Why? Scholars debate it endlessly. Some say the photo was taken but lost. Others claim he refused to be photographed in anything but his preferred style, mustache included. Historians still argue whether this was narcissism or strategy, but one thing's clear, not even incarceration could smudge that square under his nose. You walk with him during his daily exercise, slow laps in the prison yard. He talks aloud to himself, practicing speeches. Not rants anymore, but structures. Openings, climaxes, closing lines. Sometimes he stops mid-stride, turns sharply, and addresses an imaginary crowd. Then he smiles barely and keeps walking. You'd think prison would humble a man, but instead it distills him, concentrates him. He emerges not broken, but edited. When he's released in 1924, he returns to the public eye with more control, fewer outbursts, more patience, a tighter grip on his image. He's no longer just a man with a mustache, he's the mustache with a movement. You pass a storefront window and catch a newspaper headline, Hitler released. Declares nonviolent path forward. Sure, that sounds comforting until you read the subtext. He's just changing tactics, not beliefs. The public is split. Some still see him as a joke, a failed rebel with a silly facial tic. Others, they see something else, entirely focus, resolve, even charisma. You see teenage boys in Bavaria start to mimic the look, shaving off their whiskers just to leave the tiny square. It's subtle, but it's spreading. You sit in on a secret meeting one evening. Early Nazi leadership gathered around a dim oil lamp. They're discussing branding, logos, uniforms, flags, and yes, appearances. We need to stand apart, someone says. We need unity, says another. And then someone gestures toward Hitler's face. That he says, that mustache, it sticks. Silence, then a nod. And just like that, it's official, the mustache becomes part of the uniform. It's no longer about Hitler alone. It's about what he represents. You can feel the shift like steel grinding against steel. His face, once strange, once mocked, is now etched into the psyches of thousands. And you're starting to understand. This isn't just a personal quirk anymore. It's a flag planted on a battlefield of identity, of allegiance, of fear. It's shorthand for loyalty, for purity, for danger. And as Germany descends deeper into political madness, one thing stays eerily consistent like the eye of a storm. That little square of darkness, unsmiling, unchanging. and still growing in power. The year is 1930, and the streets of Berlin throb with energy, dust, and dread. You move through the crowds like smoke slipping between bodies, workers in caps and overcoats, mothers clutching bread tickets, students shouting slogans. Germany is fractured, teetering, aching. And through it all, one image keeps catching your eye. That face, that stare, that mustache. It's everywhere now. On pamphlets, on flags, even scratched into bathroom stalls. Crude sketches of it, blocky and absurd next to swastikas and slogans. The hair under Hitler's nose has transcended biology. It's now an icon, a threat, a promise, mainstream historical fact. By 1930, the Nazi Party had surged in popularity, winning over 100 seats in the Reichstag and becoming the second largest political party in Germany. Their rise was fueled by widespread economic despair, propaganda mastery, and Hitler's growing charisma or menace, depending on your angle. You're in one of those propaganda meetings now, slipping quietly into a corner. The room buzzes with typewriters, cigarette smoke, and clipped orders. We need more visuals, someone barks. Something simple, unmistakable. People should recognize it from across the street. A young illustrator flips through sketches, eagles, bold typefaces, marching silhouettes. Then quietly he holds up a minimalist poster, just a shadowed face, square jaw, sharp brow, and that little black stamp between the nose and lip. No name, no words, just the mustache. They all nod, no need for explanation. And here's your quirky detail. One early version of the Nazi Youth Recruitment Guide featured a grooming section that advised aspiring boys to aim for clean appearances, and when older to emulate the heroic profile of our Führer, including his dignified style. Historians still argue whether this was a subtle nudge toward adopting the mustache itself, but records show that small clusters of teenage recruits began copying it, though many struggled to grow the hair. You see them now, awkward 15-year-olds with patchy fuzz under their noses, trying so hard to be part of something. Their mothers laugh nervously. Their fathers nod grimly. No one says the word cult, but you can feel it in the air like static. By now, Hitler isn't just a figure in rallies, he's on the radio, in cinemas, in conversation. He's a voice in your home, a poster on your door, a whisper in your neighbor's ear. The image is spreading faster than reason. You're in a Berlin cinema as a short propaganda reel rolls before the main film. There he is again, walking in slow motion, surrounded by guards, crowds cheering. The mustache quivers in the flickering light. It almost looks like it's twitching alive. The narrator drones. Our savior, our strength, our singular leader. You glance around. Everyone's eyes are locked on the screen. No one breathes. No one blinks. One child, barely 7, stands up and salutes instinctively. His hand trembles. Hitler's speeches now come with choreography. Not just in the words, but in the expressions, the sneer, the stare, the tightly clenched mouth beneath that perfect rectangle. Even his silence feels rehearsed. You visit a photography studio that's received direct instructions from the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Every photo of Hitler must be approved. No deviations, no informal shots, nothing too human. And always the mustache must be intact. Framed, centered. One assistant mentions that a single altered photo, a rare image showing Hitler with a full mustache in his youth, was removed from circulation and quietly archived. Historians still argue whether this purge was deliberate image crafting or obsessive insecurity. Probably both. You walk the halls of government buildings and see portraits of him hung like shrines. All the same angle. All the same expression. The mustache strangely has become a kind of filter distracting from the man's ordinary features, focusing attention like a target. And yet, despite its absurdity, it works. Here's a darker truth. In authoritarian regimes, symbols don't need to make sense. They just need to repeat. The mustache becomes a shibboleth, a tribal marker. If you mock it, you're suspect. If you mimic it, you're safe. And if you fear it, then it's already done its job. You hear stories whispered in cafes, stories of people arrested for defacing Hitler's image, not slashing the swastika, not burning a flag, just drawing devil horns or worse, adding a second mustache. That's all it takes. People begin to censor themselves. A barber in Dresden removes his wall caricatures. A theater drops a comedic play for fear of mustache references. A woman sewing dolls with tiny black squares under their noses is reported by a neighbor for mockery. You stand in line outside a bakery and hear two men whisper, "Do you think he trims it himself?" No, I bet he has someone, a mustache butler. They both chuckle, then look around, nervous. One coughs and mutters, "Forget I said that." Because by now the mustache isn't funny anymore. It's doctrine. And that's when you start noticing something else. In fashion magazines, in silent films, in ad illustrations, the shape starts disappearing, not just from Hitler's face, but from everyone else's. The toothbrush mustache is being quietly erased from popular culture. Historians still debate why. Some say it was simple association, no one wanted to risk the comparison. Others believe it was an unspoken decree from Nazi leadership to ensure the style belonged to only one man. Either way, where once the style was common, now it's singular. Sacred. Terrifying. You leave the city and head toward rural Germany, small towns where the propaganda reaches more slowly. But even here, you find photos pinned to barns, schoolrooms, and grocery stalls. The same face, the same black square, the same message, obey. And as you move through that countryside, you start to feel the strangest thing. The mustache isn't just a symbol of Hitler anymore. It is Hitler. And wherever it appears, even on its own, people react. A sketch in chalk on a wall draws stares. A smudge of ink on a postcard makes someone tremble. One man claims he saw it in a piece of burnt toast. You laugh. Then you stop laughing, because deep down you realize it's not funny. It never was. It's a brand that no longer sells anything except silence, control, and fear. And it's far from done growing. You stand in the cold echo of a marble hall. Stiff uniforms, red banners, and those enormous Nazi eagles glaring down at you. Like they know your search history. It's now the mid-1930s, and Adolf Hitler is no longer a rising force. He is the force. Chancellor. Führer. Father of the nation. The mustache, once a peculiar little patch, is now codified into state mythology. It's not just a style, it's a stamp of authority. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In August 1934, Hitler officially merged the role of chancellor and president after Hindenburg's death, solidifying his absolute power. The German military swore an oath not to Germany, but directly to Hitler himself. The oath doesn't mention the mustache, obviously, but you can't help thinking when those soldiers visualized the man they were pledging their lives to, what did they picture first? Yeah, you know the answer. That tidy little square carved like punctuation beneath a scowl. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In a secret 1935 memo uncovered after the war, the Nazi Ministry of Culture discussed national grooming standards. While most of the memo is mundane hats, hair hygiene, one bizarre paragraph, warns against mustache variations among high-ranking officials. Confusion weakens unity, it says. The Führer's image must remain singular and distinct. Historians still argue whether this was satire policy or somewhere depressingly in between. So you're in a room full of generals. Iron crosses, glinting boots so polished they reflect your guilt. And all of them are clean-shaven above the lip. No one even attempts to imitate his style now. Not even Goring, and that guy dresses like a flamboyant medieval warlock. Because the mustache is sacred space, you trail behind Hitler as he strolls through Berghof, his mountain retreat. He's oddly serene here, humming old opera tunes, feeding deer by hand, pointing out clouds shaped like tanks. His valet, a young man with trembling hands, carefully adjusts Hitler's mirror each morning for shaving. You learn something surprising here. Hitler trims the mustache himself. Every day. Same blade, same ritual. Quiet, focused. You watch as he leans in close, tongue pressed to one side of his mouth in concentration. A single slip a jagged edge and he sighs, starting again from scratch. He calls it discipline. Calls it, and if that's not the creepiest grooming habit you've ever witnessed, consider this. He's never once been seen in public with the mustache off-center. Never too long, never faded. It's always perfect, like it's drawn on. Sometimes as you watch him at his desk, scribbling speeches or sketching absurd battle plans, you wonder, does he even like the mustache? Or is he trapped by it now, a prisoner of his own brand? There are no photos, no diary entries, no aides notes ever suggesting he considered shaving it off. Historians still argue whether it was a choice he continued to make or one he made once and could never unmake. You step into a Nazi youth camp one sticky summer afternoon. Boys in brown shirts are lined up chanting loyalty slogans, swinging spades, trying to look fierce. You overhear two of them arguing over facial hair. "I'll grow it when I'm older," one whispers. "You won't pull it off," the other mutters. "Only the Fuhrer can." It's like a fairy tale gone wrong. In place of dragons and swords, you have politics and paranoia, and one little scrap of hair that now holds the weight of an empire's soul. You wander into a propaganda workshop, a cramped office in Berlin, where artists design posters. One wall is plastered with Hitler portraits, each slightly different in lighting or angle, but never in mustache. A frustrated artist complains, "It's harder to draw than you think. Too square, it looks fake. Too soft, it looks weak. It has to be just right." You try sketching it yourself, just the mustache. On a blank page. No nose, no eyes, nothing else. And yet instantly you recognize him. You feel him. That's the power of repetition, of fear, of branding. You shift into one of those torchlit rallies, thousands packed into the Nuremberg rally grounds, flames flickering in unison, the air thick with smoke and scripted rage. Hitler approaches the podium spotlights, slicing through the haze. Silence falls like a dropped curtain, and then he begins. You barely hear the words. It's cadence more than content now. His voice rises, falls, cracks, pauses. And there at the center of the spectacle is the face they all came to see. Stern, unflinching, the mustache catching shadows like a black hole. Every eye in the stadium is locked on it, on him. Some of them probably believe in it more than they believe in God. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Europe, caricaturists are having a field day. British cartoons exaggerate the mustache to the size of a piano key. French satirical magazines give it legs and let it march across the page. One even draws Hitler's entire head as just a mustache, black and bristling like a centipede. But here's the sinister irony: the more people mock it abroad, the more iconic it becomes at home. The laughter outside feeds the loyalty inside. In one chilling anecdote, you hear of a Jewish tailor who refused to alter a client's mustache to resemble Hitler's. "I sew clothes, not tyrants," he'd said. He vanished a week later. You visit a women's salon where posters quietly remind patrons, "True German women admire clean faces." It's not just the men being shaped now. Women are being told how to view, how to desire, how to worship. And always at the top of that pyramid of ideals sits a moody vegetarian with a square under his nose. The style has become both armor and weapon. You see it repelling criticism, drawing devotion, and broadcasting menace. Even foreign dignitaries during diplomatic visits avoid mentioning it. One diplomat from Italy reportedly referred to it as the silent third party in every meeting. You walk out of a military parade and look around. Swastikas swirl, goose steps thunder, planes roar overhead. But all you can think about is how one absurd little patch of hair has metastasized into something vast and violent. Not a quirk, not an accident. A manifeste. The mustache now looms over Europe like a shadow, ubiquitous, unblinking, and it's not done yet. You wake to the sharp ring of a distant alarm and the faint crackle of radio static. The year is 1939, and the world is about to catch fire. As German troops pour into Poland and the ink on diplomacy runs dry, you watch the world tip from dread into chaos. The mustache, yes, that same ominous square now becomes more than just a symbol. It's a flag of war, mainstream historical fact. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the start of World War II. The Blitzkrieg strategy, marked by speed and surprise, demonstrated a terrifying new kind of warfare, one that bore Hitler's personal stamp. And with every newspaper headline and radio bulletin that uses the word Hitler, you can feel that facial emblem glaring back at the world like a challenge. By now, you've stopped seeing it as facial hair. It's become an icon like the Nike swoosh if the swoosh had a body count. You stroll through the streets of London. It's September 3rd. Britain has just declared war. The mood is tense. But the cartoonists, they're having a heyday. Here's your quirky tidbit. That very afternoon, the London Evening Standard ran a caricature of Hitler as a child, refusing to share his toy soldiers. The kicker. The mustache is drawn bigger than his entire head. It's practically its own character. Back in Germany, though, it's deadly serious. Propaganda reels show Hitler surrounded by maps, generals and adoring crowds, but every shot is carefully staged. Not a single angle risks making the mustache look silly or asymmetrical. You're at a military film review session now. A director pauses the reel. Too much glare on the upper lip, he mutters. Makes him look like he has a milk mustache. The reel is scrapped. The editor is reassigned. Historians still argue whether such extreme image control came from Hitler himself or was simply the result of collective terror and sycophancy. Honestly, both options feel equally plausible. You join a Luftwaffe squadron as they prep for a mission. In the barracks, someone has drawn a mustache on the back of a potato and nicknamed it Little Führer. Everyone laughs, quietly, nervously. The next day, that potato is missing, and so is the cook. You sit beside a war correspondent decoding intercepted radio transmissions. One British message says simply, "The mustache is moving east." It's a joke, of course, but also not a joke. The mustache has become a metonym for Hitler himself. It's code, it's shorthand, it's dread. You step into Paris, June 1940. The city has fallen. German troops march under the Arc de Triomphe. Hitler visits for barely a few hours, but photos are snapped, processed, and spread like wildfire. Every shot is iconic. Black coat, cold expression, and yes, that black square centered like a stamp on official history. But you notice something else now. In occupied cities, barbers are being warned no one is to receive a toothbrush mustache, not even as a joke. One Parisian salon hangs a sign that says, "All styles available," except that one. Meanwhile, resistance groups across Europe begin using the mustache against him. British pilots draw Hitler's face on bombs. French teenagers stencil tiny mustaches on walls with rude captions underneath. One infamous Polish flyer simply reads, "He thinks he is God." But God wouldn't wear that thing. You walk through a ruined village in Belgium. The only building still standing is the church. Inside, someone has etched a tiny mustache onto a painting of a saint. A child giggles. His mother doesn't. But here's the strangest part. You start noticing Hitler's actual mustache getting smaller. Not drastically, but enough to wonder. Old propaganda films from 1933 show a bolder, fuller square. Now in 1941, it's neater, more clipped, less assertive. Barbers speculate wildly. One says he's aging and the gray shows more. Easier to keep it tight. Another swears, it's stress. The man trims it obsessively when he's anxious. Historians still argue whether this shift was vanity paranoia or just a reflection of a mind unraveling under the weight of his own delusions. You sit through a military parade in Munich. The crowd roars, planes scream overhead, but a young boy next to you leans close and asks, why does he wear the same mustache every day? Doesn't he get bored? You pause. Because it's a good question. When a symbol becomes bigger than the person still control it? Or does the symbol begin to dictate the person? Back at Hitler's headquarters, you watch him in front of a mirror again. He tilts his face, studies the angle. The scissors glide carefully. Not too much, not too little. The same every time. It's become his ritual, his superstition, his armor. And it's also his cage. You flip through Allied military guides. One British intelligence manual includes a section on recognizing enemy officers. The entry for Hitler reads simply, short, gaunt, mesmerizing, mustache unmistakable. Unmistakable. That's the word everyone uses now, and not in a good way. You think of Charlie Chaplin, the original toothbrush mustache guy. He'd worn it decades earlier before Hitler even knew how to do a salute. Now Chaplin regrets ever using it. In a private letter, he says he's turned something silly into something sinister. The final straw comes in 1940 when Chaplin releases The Great Dictator. You watch it in a smoky theater. Chaplin dances, mocks, weeps. His mustache wobbles between tragedy and farce. But the audience is silent. Some laugh nervously, others just stare. Because that square of black fuzz is no longer funny, not even close. And yet, it should be funny. It's absurd, ridiculous even. A tiny, overly neat strip of hair? But now it's bound to genocide, to horror, to war. How did it get this far? Because repetition is powerful, branding is brutal, and fear is stickier than laughter. You leave the theater and walk into the cold night, your thoughts drifting with the fog. Somewhere out there, Hitler is planning his next move. Tanks are rolling, bombs are falling, maps are being redrawn. And somewhere in all that chaos, a man is standing in front of a mirror trimming the edge of a mustache he can never escape. The war has dragged into its grimmest chapters. It's now the early 1940s, and you're sitting in a cold concrete bunker, carved into the Polish soil. The air hums with distant gunfire. Above the sky is a blur of smoke and steel. Below, inside this subterranean lair, Hitler is listening to maps speak. His eyes twitch with every movement of a red pushpin. And still that mustache. Razor straight, immaculately trimmed, perfectly black. Somehow untouched by the mud, the blood, the madness. Mainstream historical fact. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union and opening the Eastern Front. It was a bold, hubristic move, one that would stretch the Wehrmacht too thin and doom millions to unimaginable suffering. And through it all, the mustache remained steady. A black slash against a pale face frozen in time. It became like a visual tick. Every time you see him on newsreel footage, it draws your eyes before his words even land. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some Wehrmacht soldiers on the Eastern Front began referring to blizzards as Hitler's shaving cream. The joke, if you could call it that, was whispered while lighting frozen cigarettes. If he's planning to march through Russia with that tiny mustache, he must think the snow won't touch him. You move now to a secret Nazi gathering in 1942. Advisors gather to discuss morale, not just battle losses, but image losses. One aide tentatively suggests softening Hitler's look, less yelling, more warmth. Maybe we even consider adjusting the mustache, he mumbles. The room freezes. No one responds, no one moves. Later, that man is reassigned to weather reports in Norway. Historians still argue whether Hitler truly saw his mustache as sacred, or whether his inner circle believed he did, and so projected that reverence outward like a cult of facial symmetry. You drift beside him during a late-night address. His eyes sunken gesture slower now, but when the cameras start rolling, he stiffens. The voice sharpens. The hands return to their choreography. And there it is again, that dark little square, more rigid than ever, anchoring a face that seems more hollow each day. You walk with him through the Wolf's Lair, his hidden headquarters in East Prussia. The concrete walls are thick, the windows few, and the silence suffocating. The corridors echo with bootsteps and muttered reports. Hitler rarely smiles now. When he does, it's the tight curl of someone who's forgotten how teeth work. But each morning, like clockwork, he shaves. The valet tells you something strange. He does it like a priest saying mass. Always the same hand, same pressure. He trims the edges with more care than he gives to troop positions. You peek into the bathroom, one steam on the mirror razor in hand, that tiny black patch framed like it's the crown jewel of evil. You wonder, is this obsession? Is it control, or is it fear that changing even this small detail might unravel everything? One day, deep in the bunker, you overhear a rumor. A general claims he saw Hitler once in private with the mustache gone. Just for a moment, just a few days. A trial run, maybe. He looked wrong, the general whispered, like a balloon deflated. But the idea dies quickly. No photos, no confirmation, just shadows and whispers. You move next to occupied Norway, where local Nazi sympathizers are trying to copy Hitler's look. But something gets lost in translation. Their mustaches are too wide, too square, too silly. Norwegian cartoonists mock them mercilessly. One paper even starts a contest, Spot the Stash, a weekly roundup of the worst attempts at Hitler's facial style. Even the Nazis there quietly abandon it, because only he can wear it now, or rather survive it. You're there when the Allies bomb Hamburg. The city burns red. Civilians scream. Buildings collapse. And yet the next issue of Der Stürmer features Hitler on the cover, angry pointing lips pursed, and yes, the mustache untouched, unbothered like a punctuation mark mocking the rubble. In a bunker beneath Berlin, you sit beside Goebbels, the propaganda master. He flips through images for the next morale campaign. Tanks, eagles, swastikas, and Hitler's face always included. Goebbels taps one picture. This one, he says. It's strong. You look closer. It's the mustache, framed dead center, every pixel perfect. He sighs. That little square's our entire message now. Meanwhile, in America, barbers are offering Hitler freestyles. One Chicago paper jokes, we've banned that mustache unless you're squashing it under your boots. Charlie Chaplin's film has been re-released, and suddenly people are shaving off their toothbrush mustaches in droves. The look is now radioactive. In Britain, a pub hangs a sign, no dogs, no fascists, no stupid mustaches. But back in Berlin, Hitler still trims. One edge, then the other, line by line, like a captain adjusting his medals on a sinking ship. You visit a Nazi photo archive, dozens of shots, each carefully staged. But you notice something odd in the later pictures. His face looks thinner. The mustache, once bold, now looks like a scar. It hasn't changed, but the context has. It's no longer powerful. It's tragic, like a stage prop left behind after the curtain falls. One night, Hitler wanders alone through the bunker corridors. He murmurs to himself, talks to portraits. The war is collapsing around him. Cities are falling like dominoes. Allies are circling like vultures. His generals have started disagreeing with him out loud. Some even stop saluting. But every morning the same thing, a tiny mirror, a silver razor, a face staring back desperately, holding onto the one part of himself that still obeys. You lean closer, peering through the dim bunker light, and see something heartbreaking. His hand shakes, just slightly, enough to nick the edge. He stares at it for a long time. Then carefully he fixes it. Because the war may be lost, but the mustache must go on. The war's end is coming, but no one wants to admit it, not even the man with the infamous mustache. You find yourself in Berlin, April 1945. The city is a frozen ruin beneath a gray sky, buildings gutted, and streets littered with the ghosts of artillery shells and desperate last stands. The air smells of smoke and despair. You follow the sound of muffled voices and find yourself in the Führer bunker deep underground, a claustrophobic nest where time seems to stop. The walls are thick, the corridors narrow, and the shadows long and unyielding. Hitler sits at his desk, the weight of his crumbling empire etched deep into his pale face. And there, perched perfectly between his nose and upper lip, is that mustache. Black as ever, but somehow faded by defeat. Mainstream historical fact. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in this bunker as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, marking the near end of Nazi Germany. You watch as Hitler meticulously trims the mustache, each snip deliberate as if holding onto it will somehow stop the world from tearing itself apart. It's almost a ritual now, a desperate, stubborn insistence on order amidst chaos. You notice a quirky detail? Some bunker staff recall that during those last days, Hitler's mustache was so carefully groomed that any stray hair caused him visible frustration, sometimes even tantrums. One nurse even joked that the mustache was the only thing in the bunker still alive and well. The contrast couldn't be starker. Outside, the city burns and screams. Inside, the man clings to a tiny patch of hair like a lifeline. Historians still argue whether this obsession with grooming was a form of self-control or a final act of vanity. But either way, it's painfully human. You follow the final moments. Hitler dictates his last will and political testament, the mustache twitching as he speaks. The voice is weaker now, but still commanding. And still rehearsed, still hiding the cracks beneath the surface. You overhear a whispered conversation among officers. One asks another why Hitler never shaved off the mustache despite all the horror associated with it. The reply? It's his identity. Without it, he'd be just another man lost in history. That mustache made him a symbol. And symbols last longer than men. You think about that as you sit in the dim bunker. The weight of history pressing in. When Hitler's body is found, the mustache remains intact. Soviet soldiers note the detail in their reports, almost as if it's a strange marker of the man beneath the monster. And then, as the world tries to move on, the mustache becomes a shadow haunting the 20th century. You find yourself decades later in a museum looking at artifacts from the war photos, uniforms documents. And oddly enough, a razor said to be used by Hitler himself, the one that kept his infamous mustache in perfect shape. Visitors pass by, some curious, some repulsed, but no one can look away. The mustache has become more than facial hair. It's a reminder, a warning, a piece of dark iconography. You hear debates among scholars. Some say the mustache's simplicity made it unforgettable, a branding success that Hitler never fully appreciated until it was too late. Others argue it was a tragic mistake, an absurd choice that inadvertently turned him into a caricature, undermining the serious menace he tried to project. You wander through classrooms where teachers use images of that mustache to teach history, morality, and the dangers of fanaticism. You think back to that first morning you saw at the odd little square that looked so out of place on a serious man's face. And now as the night deepens, you understand. The secret of Hitler's beard isn't just in the shape, or size, or style. It's in the story it tells of identity, obsession, power, and ultimately downfall. As the dust of war settles across Europe, you find yourself tracing the strange afterlife of that infamous mustache. No longer worn by its original owner, it becomes a symbol both feared and ridiculed. In the rubble of post-war cities, people whisper stories not just about Hitler the man, but about the tiny patch of hair that branded a nightmare. You walk through the ruins of a once glorious German city. Among the shattered storefronts and toppled statues, you spot a hand-painted sign on a wall, "No more stashes." It's a local's protest against the lingering presence of fascist imagery in everyday life. Mainstream historical fact. After World War II, the toothbrush mustache rapidly fell out of fashion, becoming associated almost exclusively with Hitler and fascism, leading to its near-total disappearance in the West. The quirkier side of this story is how the mustache became a sort of forbidden fruit in popular culture. In America, barbers refused to trim it for decades. Comedians tiptoed around jokes about it. Films had to carefully decide whether to show or obscure it when portraying Hitler. Meanwhile, some fringe artists and satirists tried to reclaim it wearing the mustache, ironically to shock, provoke, or make political statements. But most people saw that little black square as too toxic, too heavy with history. Historians still argue about the extent to which the mustache shaped Hitler's public image versus how much the man shaped the mustache's meaning. Was it just a quirk of style, or did it become a visual shorthand for evil itself? You flip through an old-fashioned magazine from the 1950s. A satire piece shows a man in a business suit sporting a toothbrush mustache with the caption, "Beware the mustachioed menace." The joke lands somewhere between playful and pointed. You visit a museum dedicated to facial hair. Yes, one exists, and you stand among displays of beards, goatees, and sideburns. The toothbrush mustache is featured behind glass, a tiny, infamous relic that draws more looks than the full Viking beard exhibit. You discover an odd artifact, a package of mustache stencil templates from the 1940s intended to help men shape their facial hair. One stencil obviously is crossed out with a bold red line. The caption, "Avoid this look at all costs." You attend a comedy show where the comedian briefly references the mustache as history's worst fashion faux pas. The crowd chuckles, but the laughter is tinged with discomfort. You stroll through a university debate on symbolism and identity. One professor argues that the mustache is a perfect example of how a simple visual element can become a container of meaning carrying heavy historical baggage well beyond its original intent. Another scholar counters, saying it's a reminder of how easily power can be disguised in the most mundane details. You walk into a barber shop and ask the barber if anyone ever requests the toothbrush mustache these days. He laughs, shaking his head. Only as a joke. Usually from tourists trying to be edgy. But trust me, most people don't get the joke. Or if they do, they're too nervous to say it out loud. You lean back in the barber chair, imagining the bizarre journey of that tiny strip of hair from early 20th century comedy to a symbol of terror to cultural taboo. In the end, you realize the secret of Hitler's beard isn't just about style or vanity. It's about how something so small can become so large in the story of history, how a patch of hair can mark an era, shape a legacy, and haunt the world's memory for generations. The years turn into decades, and you're now in the 21st century. You find yourself scrolling through endless streams of images and memes on the internet, a digital archive of history's quirks, including, of course, the ever-recognizable Hitler mustache. It's everywhere, but mostly as a symbol of parody or protest. Some wear it in costume parties, others erase it digitally in old footage, while many simply use it as shorthand for tyranny and political cartoons. Mainstream historical fact. The toothbrush mustache was popularized by early 20th century comedians like Charlie Chaplin, before becoming irrevocably linked to Hitler during the 1930s and 1940s, a quirky modern twist. Some viral challenges have encouraged people to sport the infamous mustache for shock value, only to be met with mixed reactions ranging from laughter to outright offense. Internet culture has turned it into a meme, but one with serious boundaries. Historians still argue whether the mustache's presence in popular culture trivializes the atrocities committed under Hitler's regime, or if it serves as a form of social catharsis, helping society process trauma through humor. You pause on a documentary clip of Chaplin's The Great Dictator, where the little mustache appears on a comedic tyrant. The irony is thick. Chaplin's use of the mustache predates Hitler's rise, but was forever overshadowed afterward. You imagine the mustache as a kind of mirror one reflecting both humor and horror. On the other side of the internet, you stumble across serious discussions about historical symbolism. Some argue that, despite its small size, the mustache's impact is outsized, functioning as a warning sign against the dangers of authoritarianism. You click into a forum where users debate whether any other facial hairstyle could have carried such weight. Some say no, citing the mustache's simplicity and starkness as key factors. You visit a contemporary barber who specializes in vintage styles. You ask if anyone ever requests the toothbrush mustache in this era. He grins once in a blue moon someone wants it for Halloween or a movie role. But honestly, I usually talk them out of it. The history is just too heavy. The barber tells you about a recent client who asked for it ironically, only to have friends react with unease. It's a small patch of hair, but it carries a big load. You reflect on how something so tiny could become a symbol of such immense cultural weight. The mustache, once just a quirky facial fashion, now stands as a reminder of the power of image in shaping history. You consider how the secret of Hitler's beard in the end is about the interplay of image identity and legacy, a small detail amplified into a lasting symbol. As you move deeper into the 21st century, you notice something subtle but profound. The mustache's legacy shifts yet again. No longer just a historical oddity or a symbol of terror, it becomes a case study in branding psychology and even modern identity politics. You attend a university lecture on visual propaganda. The professor points to a slide featuring Hitler's mustache, black rectangular, instantly recognizable. This, she says, is an example of how a simple visual cue can become a symbol with incredible psychological power. It's minimalism meets menace. Mainstream historical fact. Hitler's toothbrush mustache was unusual compared to the fuller handlebar styles, popular in the early 1900s, making it uniquely identifiable. The quirky angle. Some psychologists speculate that the mustache was intentionally chosen for its aggressive, almost bite-sized shape, which subconsciously conveyed control and sharpness like a visual stop sign on the face. Historians still argue whether Hitler chose this mustache style before or after rising to power, or if it was imposed by others to craft his public image. Some say it was a personal preference, others a deliberate branding decision. You explore how the mustache's shape influenced later uses of visual branding in politics and advertising, how minimalistic logos and simple shapes can evoke powerful emotional responses. You hear about the mustache effect in psychology, where a single striking visual element becomes a mental anchor, influencing how people perceive the whole image. The mustache is a textbook example. You visit a fashion exhibit focusing on facial hair trends. The curator explains how post-World War II the toothbrush mustache virtually disappeared, but it resurfaced briefly in niche subcultures, often ironically, often provocatively. You learn that the mustache's association with fascism makes it a cultural taboo, yet it remains a subject of fascination, study, and even art. A contemporary artist you interview says it's like the mustache is a ghost we can't shake. It haunts us, but also challenges us to remember and reflect. You think back to all the moments you witnessed: the careful morning trims, the nervous jokes among soldiers, the ironic barbershop stories. You realize the secret of Hitler's beard is more than history or fashion. It's about how symbols evolve, how they carry stories across time, and how something as small as a patch of hair can hold the weight of a world's darkest chapters. You take a deep breath and let the thought settle. Now, as the story nears its end, you feel the quiet gravity settle around you. You're not just looking at a mustache anymore. You're holding a thread that connects decades of history, culture, psychology, and memory. You sit in a dimly lit room, the soft hum of a fan in the background, the same setting you asked for at the start. You think about how the smallest details often carry the largest stories. Mainstream historical fact. Hitler's mustache, originally a common style in early 20th century Europe, became forever linked to one of history's darkest figures, transforming it into a powerful symbol of tyranny and hate. Quirky tidbit. In recent years, some historians have speculated that Hitler might have trimmed his mustache from a larger style to fit better under a gas mask during World War I, showing how practical concerns shaped an infamous image. Historians still argue whether this practical origin story is fact or just a comforting myth, one that tries to explain how a simple grooming choice turned into an enduring icon of evil. You reflect on how this tiny strip of hair, so carefully groomed, so meticulously maintained, came to symbolize much more than just facial hair. It is a reminder of identity wielded as a weapon of how appearances shape perception. You think about how the mustache continues to ripple through culture, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a warning, always as a symbol. And you realize that the secret of Hitler's beard is a cautionary tale about the power of symbols, the weight of history, and the human need to understand through the smallest details. Now, as you settle deeper into the night, you feel the story folding gently around you like a soft blanket, pulling you closer to sleep. Let the image fade slowly, no sharp edges, no sudden stops. Just the quiet echo of a little patch of hair that shaped a century. Rest easy now. The story is done. You breathe out slowly, the weight of history lifting slightly as your mind drifts away. Think of the mustache as a small, strange symbol, one that reminds us how the tiniest things can carry the heaviest burdens. There's a softness now in the fading light, the quiet hum of night weaving its calm around you. Remember, every detail, every shadow is part of a larger picture, one that we all carry in different ways. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let the past settle gently. Let the lessons drift in like a lullaby, comforting and quiet. Thank you for sharing this journey. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest deep, and your mind light. Good night.